Alrighty, welcome everybody to today's Shortline Safety Institute webinar. We have high, wide, and heavy, moving your big freight safely. And with us today we have Mr. Clay Campbell, Director of Wind Energy Sales with BNSF Logistics. I'll go over just a brief introduction and we'll get right into our presentation. So my name is Michelle Malsky, as you know. I'm the Safety Programs Manager here at the Shortline Safety Institute, and I'll be your guide during today's presentation. Before we begin, I would like to take this opportunity to thank everyone for attending our webinar today. We hope that you will enjoy the educational presentation we have prepared. In case you would like to watch this presentation again or share it with your team in the future, this presentation will be recorded, and we will make the recording available at the conclusion of today's presentation on our website, which is www.shortlinesafety.org. Just click on the Webinars tab and select the webinar in which you wish to view. To ensure quality audio during this presentation, we have placed all attendees on mute at this time. You will only be able to hear our presenters speaking. If you have questions during the presentations, you may use the question bar located on the lower right-hand side of the webinar pop-up screen to type in your inquiries. We'll have dedicated time at the end of this presentation to read through all submitted questions and provide time for our presenters to answer. If you have any questions after our presentation, please feel free to reach out to me or the presenter with the contact information listed on the very last slide of this presentation. Now for today's webinar, I'd like to introduce our panelist. Mr. Clay Campbell, who is our Director of Wind Energy Sales with BNSF, has a history in the rail industry. From 2003 to 2005, he was with J.B. Hunt. After that, spent some time with BNSF Railway as a train master, as well as within the Miscellaneous Revenue, Demurrage, Storage, and Extended Services Department, and then at sales as well with BNSF, covering commodities such as chemicals, plastics, metals, lumber, and project cargo. Now, Mr. Clay Campbell is with the BNSF Logistics Company and their Director of Wind Energy Sales. So with those credentials being presented, I would like to present to you our panelist for today. And he is on the line with me now, so I will turn it over to him to get us kicked off. Mr. Campbell, the show is yours.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you to not only Michelle, but also to Shortline Safety Institute for allowing me to talk to you guys today. I really feel like we've got a lot of opportunity here to talk about some items to help you guys operate safely when you're talking about this headache freight. So we'll go ahead and get kicked off here. Michelle's highlighted most of my background there, and that is all very accurate stuff. On the commercial side at the railroad, you know, in my operations time, I had a lot of opportunity to work with numerous short lines and regional roads in Illinois and in Texas, and then all over the country on the commercial side, working with project cargo, focusing with generators, steam turbines, transformers, a lot on the wind energy side as well with the blades, with the towers, and the nacelles and hubs. All right, so to kind of go over today's topics, we're going to talk a little bit about reviewing the details regarding high, wide, and heavy, with talks about movement limitations, clearances, some safety-specific items, talk about the processes that in my opinion are important processes for high, wide movements, and then as Michelle noted, at the end there'll be an opportunity for question and answer. What talks about, you know, what defines high and wide? Really, the definition of high and wide is anything that's outside of your railroad's physical constraints for normal operations. Anything that's going to require any type of special handling, really it's the headache freight. You know, anything, you know, you can operate lots of stuff every day that is normal. It's in a box car, it's in a tank car, it's an open top load on a flat car, but it's within plate and it's within what you consider as quote unquote normal. But really it's, what I'm talking about today is the stuff that falls outside of that, and I'll show some examples in a minute. Before I go any further, I want to make sure that what I'm talking about today is I'm providing just general information, and I'm not here to provide any technical advice on any particular move. Anything, you know, AAR and railroad rules, open top loading rules, all of that supersedes anything if there's a discrepancy here. Again, I just want to provide some guidance and some oversight and talk about my experience that I've had. So really, as we get started here, the first thing is just knowing your limitations. Know what, every part of your railroad is going to be a little different, and so therefore there's going to be, you just really have to understand your network and how that's going to operate. You have to really understand your rail, your tie, your ballast conditions, your bridge loadings for axle loadings. Know what structures and fouls are in the way. Know your track spinners. All of those things go into this as you're trying to move these items across your network safely and damage-free. Every load's different. Every load's going to have a different weight profile as it's loaded on the rail car. Different types of rail cars are going to have different loading restrictions and guidelines as they see fit. And then every component's going to be a little different. I've got some images here on the screen of windmill blades on the left side, and those blades extend beyond. They're loaded over multiple rail cars, and so understanding the characteristics of that freight as it's loaded on the rail car there. But knowing, like I said, those items there are really key. And then you have to be able to account for your limitations. So knowing your limitations is the first part, but then how do you account for those and work through those? And like I said, it just takes time, creativity, and ingenuity, really. And money's a factor of that as well. Sometimes things have to spend money to move things out of the way. Or maybe it's just, can we be more creative with the type of rail car that's being used? How is it being loaded on the rail car? Some things that you can account for here is increasing axle count. There's 20, 24 axle shiftable deck rail cars. Is that something that makes sense for this specific move? Is there different types of rail equipment that can be used? Are there capital improvements? Can a signal be moved? Can a building be is there a building that's too close that maybe it needs to be removed? Is that even feasible? If it comes down to it, if there's a physical restriction that just cannot be moved, can you truck around it? A lot of this project cargo, honestly, the transportation side is not always the main focus on a financial side, and so is there opportunity to be creative and truck around a short distance. A lot of this stuff can't be moved long haul over the road anyways, but a short distance can be considered. But then also accounting for it using measurement technology. A lot of times the measurements that are being done are maybe old, haven't been updated in years. Maybe they were done before the current technology that's available is there. So there's a lot of, for lack of a better term, a fudge factor involved that is reducing the ability to move this on a particular part of your railroad. So leveraging the new measurement technology to go out and get a very accurate update, accurate reflection of what your physical restrictions are is also very important. The last thing that anybody wants to do is to assume that something can fit or can clear, and then it not, and have an injury or incident would be the last thing anybody wants. So taking all of those things into account, being able to come up with a very workable solution is really a key item here. All right, so you or one of your salespeople or one of your operations folks just received a phone call. They called and they want you to move their high, wide, and heavy component. So what do you do? And again, these are my suggestions. This is not a hard and set process here, but from my experience, the first thing that what one would want to do is ask for very detailed specifications. You cannot have too much specifics on this. Knowing exactly how heavy, how tall, how wide, how long these items are, what's the center of gravity of the specific components, what's its density, is it heavier on one end versus the other, one side versus the other, and are there drawings of this component? Is it a cube, is it a cylinder, is it something else, is it shaped, is it a very odd shape? So having very detailed specifications will help you understand the characteristics of this item. Do they know what kind of rail equipment they're going to use? Some customers call and they just expect the railroad to be able to do it. Others call and they've got a very detailed plan of what they want to do. So do they know what kind of car they're going to use? Is it a single car? Can it be loaded on one rail car? Is it a bolstered load arrangement stretched across multiple vehicles, multiple rail cars? The press deck, schnabel, shiftable deck, is it a standard flat car? What what are they planning to use to move this? And do they have a loading and securement plan? Are they just sitting it on the rail car and throwing a couple of chains on there, or have they actually gone about an engineered process to create a solution for securing this safely to the rail car or rail cars that they're planning to use? Beyond that, is this an approved loading diagram or figure that's out there from AAR and open top loading, or is this something that they've come up with on their own? Two different situations. If it's something they've come up with on their own and it meets your approved safety requirements, but it's only going to move on your railroad, that's different than if it's going to move across multiple railroads onto a Class 1 or maybe across multiple short lines or regionals. Understanding the differences there are important. Approved loading diagrams and figures are approved. Those are typically that can be recreated and used. That's going to be able to be used across multiple roads. Another good question to ask is, what role are they playing in this? Are they a shipper? Are they a receiver? Is it another railroad that's calling you? Are they a transloader, a 3PL? Anybody. What is their role in this? Is this somebody that has done this a lot? Do they have a lot of experience, or is this the first time they're doing it? By no means am I telling anybody they shouldn't, select any customer. That is not the case. Every customer has the right to do this, but some will have more experience and will have some need more assistance than others. So understanding the role that they have, understanding how much experience that you have and how much experience they have to do this is all key. And then there are lots of folks out there that can help. Ask questions. There are folks in the industry that are able to provide guidance on engineering drawings and securement plans. There are folks at various railroads, Class 1, short lines, regionals, that have a lot of experience doing this. So if there's somebody that doesn't have a lot of experience and you don't either, ask your peers, ask the industry for help to make sure these can be moved safely. Another question to ask is this constructed? If so, where is it? Are the specifications verifiable? Can we go and make sure that they say that it's 14 feet 11.5 inches across at 8 feet ATR? Can we go and verify that is in fact the case, or is there a small pipe that's been welded on the side as a vent pipe or a drain pipe that actually makes it 15 feet 1 inch, and that difference could be the difference between something clearing and not clearing safely. And if it's not constructed, when will it be completed and when will it be shipped? The design and construction, like I said, can vary. A lot of times the design that we see on customer requests from clearances don't always match up with exactly as it's been constructed and it's built and it's sitting at a factory or at a port ready to get loaded. Valves, pipes, handrails, all types of things that are added after the fact by some well-intending engineer or somebody at the customer may not have made it back to the version of the clearance drawing or the version of the engineered drawing that was seen by you when you were looking at this previously or the very first time. So those all very valid questions to ask and things that should be asked. Again, not an all-inclusive list, but certainly a good starting point to get the conversation going with the people that are giving you a call. After you've done your research, we have to understand your network limitations. Take the engineered clearance drawing that they provided you or that you've worked up with them and apply that to your known restrictions. Using approved AAR figures and drawings, that's the bare minimum for a lot of loads. Not every load is going to need a very specific engineered drawing. Steel plate steel, things of that nature that are shipped every day, that are outside the plate of the rail car are still, outside, there's a high, wide, or heavy type of load. But if there's an approved AAR drawing and securement plan, that might be all that they need. And so using that to marry that up against what your railroad looks like is important. But if you get beyond that, you're going to start needing to look at clearance drawings. And I've referenced a good clearance and a great clearance drawing. Again, not an all-inclusive list, but in my experience, a good clearance drawing will have at least your axle loading, your center of gravity on the rail car, so your combined center of gravity, overall width and height. But if you really want to get to a great clearance drawing, you're going to have designs that, dimensions of various heights and intervals along the side of the car, especially if it's not a uniform shape. If you're shipping a very large cube, a very large box of some sort, a cylinder, it may not need to have extreme detailed drawings to get beyond, just the bare minimum, because it's not necessary. But if you start getting into super loads, anything requiring special handling and specialized equipment, your schnabels, your shiftable decks, odd-shaped, odd-weighted items, getting into a very detailed clearance drawing is key to understand how that's going to interact on the rail car, physics that are going to be applied in train and into your network there. Another thing to look at is what kind of rail car is going to be used, what alternate cars out there to be used. Again, a Schnabel or a shiftable deck car might be the right equipment to use to be able to allow it to clear safely, getting around obstructions that are in the way, allowing it to shift out of the way if you have a meet or a path on your railroad. And then also looking at, are you the originating road? Are you the final road? Are you in the middle? If you're originating, you have to consider not only your clearance envelope, but those of the railroads that you're connecting with, be it a Class 1 or another short line or regional or somebody else. And then, if you're on the receiving end, again, who's the most restrictive, and we'll have to fit into the most restrictive envelope. So understanding where you are in the mix. So it might clear on your railroad, it might not clear on somebody else's. So understanding the downline effect and being able to comply with everybody's clearances there. All right, so we've gone through the clearance process. We've seen the drawing. We've evaluated a lot of different opportunities here on rail cars, and we said, you know what, it's it. We've jumped through all the hurdles. We have a solution that's going to work. So how are we going to move it? And if we talk a lot about can it work and what's going to make it work, but now how are we going to make it work, and how is it going to work safely? And so a lot of things to consider. Is it something that can be moved in regular train operation? And basically that's something that not a lot of oversight is going to be needed or required for this. Almost no fouls or restrictions. There's nothing really in the way. Really, there's nothing in the way to restrict it from moving. Not any restrictions on meeting and passing, standing or moving equipment. No significant impact to train operations. I gave some examples here: steel plate, construction of farm equipment. Things that aren't extreme dimensions, aren't extreme weight, height, anything like that. Typically, seeing it towards the front of the train is preferred. Everybody has their own restrictions and where the requirements for train operations. But from a safety perspective, having it towards the front not only allows the train crew to keep an eye on it from a train handling perspective and a damage perspective, but also it's top of mind. It's right there. So when your engineer is looking at the back door, or your conductor is looking, checking his train going around a curve, those components are right there, and they're right there, and they're seeing them on a regular basis. So when there are questions or concerns or restrictions, they're not going to, less likely to forget that something's in the way or something's there. But a lot of this stuff typically will fall into more of a special handling requirement. And that can really, that's different on every railroad, every subdivision, every piece of track, every station is going to have different requirements. But for special handling, that's for y'all to decide. But in my experience, it's been where you've got meet and pass restrictions for adjacent tracks, or your track center's narrow or close enough where you cannot meet or pass trains, equipment, maintenance away equipment on opposing tracks. So you have to make a plan to keep those things clear. If you are meeting and passing, what do you have to do for those? Are you able to do a restricted speed head-in meet? Is it a maximum authorized speed meet, or is it we're at moving in hand signals? Similar at hard fouls. Is this a restricted speed head-end movement, or is this we've got a conductor or another employee on the ground protecting the movement on a hand signal or a radio movement as we're getting around a through truss bridge or around a interstate column or another hard foul there? Are we using shiftable deck cars? those are always going to, typically always going to require a rider with a caboose or a way car to be able to operate that as it's going down the track. And that has a whole different set of restrictions that you're going to have to account for. You're going to you have people now riding your train that aren't maybe your employees, and so are they qualified? Do they have insurance? Do they do this a lot? It just opens up a whole bigger can of things to ask. But there are lots of companies that do that on a regular basis. There are those that operate shiftable deck cars for themselves or on behalf of others that do this all the time, have the insurance, have the qualifications, have done this all the time, and are able to do it safely. And be more than happy to do that for you. Mentioned maximum authorized speed restrictions. Are these things going to be speed restricted based off of their size, for the entire length or size or weight, for the entire length of the trip on your railroad, or are these only going to be speed restricted, when they're operating a certain location, or maybe it's, like I mentioned, a head-end speed restriction for certain locations, whether it's meet pass, whether it's a foul, something along those lines. So understanding what the speed restriction is going to be, the weight of these things, the center of gravity will all impact that speed restriction. If the combined center of gravity loaded on the rail car is high enough, where you have to consider, rocking and effects of the track condition on the component, having a very slow speed is going to be something that you're going to want to take into account for. And then maybe, moving this at different times, off-peak operations to help minimize the impact to your other customers. I understand you've got a railroad to run. You've got dozens or hundreds or thousands of other customers that are relying on you to operate a regular network on, you operate on specific times of day very often. You're really doing this, a high level of customer service, and something outside of the norm will cause to create a very significant impact potentially when you're looking at moving something maybe at 15 miles an hour over a 30 to 100 mile section of track. Your other customers are significantly impacted. So how do you get around that? Well, night operations is one, or off-peak operations. But that, there are other safety concerns that you have to take into account for when you're doing that at off-peak time. So it's just lots of things to consider. But at the end of the day, we're trying to move this stuff safely and damage-free, but also accounting for the rest of your other customers and what they need to do and what they've come to expect from you from years of good customer service. So on the loading and securement side, again, I'm an operations person. I've worked in several train yards for Class 1s. I've been on the commercial side, for several years now. I'm not a trained engineer, PE by any means, structural, anything like that. So the things I'm going to talk about really on this loading and securement side, this is not meant to be anything official. This is just guidelines. So please refer back to open top loading rules and requirements, or any local open top loading requirements for your area. But when we're talking about loading and securement at an origin, whether it's at a customer's physical site, whether you're at a team track or another public use track that this has been moved to by truck or by barge, maybe this is at the port location where this is being imported to, we want to ask, there's a few questions that we certainly want to ask, and the first one is, are they qualified? What kind of certifications, what kind of experience do they have? Have they done it before? Is it something that they do on a regular basis? Or if they're if they're going to subcontract this work out, if it's a 3PL or maybe even a 4PL at some point, I see a lot of that today. They're bringing, 3PL bringing somebody else in to do some work for them. Is their subcontractor qualified? Or are they really going to be doing the work themselves? All very valid questions, because ultimately it affects how this is going to be done, loaded safely and securely for moving on your railroad. If you're at a port or another site requiring, stevedore or union labor, a lot of you have those, are operating with those types of locations. And a lot of times those folks are very qualified. They do this a lot, but there's lots of different types of break bulk, and it's significantly different than your row, your roll on, roll off, or your bulk. And so understanding, what their experience is with that, and what type of repeatable workforce you're going to have. We certainly operate, as BNSF Logistics, we certainly operate at lots of locations where stevedore and union labor is used, and it operates with no concern because there's a lot of highly trained, qualified individuals, but it just affects, it's just things to consider. But another question you can ask is that entity, are they sometimes, you're able to have non-union or an outside organization supervise or perform the work on their behalf at the property. Sometimes they will allow that for a certain cost. Is that the right decision to make? All things to consider when this is being done, and this is, who the person doing the loading procurement, these are all questions that they should be asking and answering as well. But if it's done on your property, this is, really where in my opinion, the property owner needs to be most concerned and most cautious, because ultimately it's on your property. You want folks to operate safely on your property, whether they're your employees or whether they're folks that are on your property there. So all questions that you're likely already asking, but just, again, these are items that I've seen. Just making sure the necessary insurance requirements are there. Do they have them? That's a pretty easy hoop to jump through and account for. Do they have the appropriate machinery to load and secure? Or are we using 110-ton crawler when a 220 is really better? Can we do this with rubber tires? Can we do this with a track hoe and a dozer? What is the right tool to use, and are they doing it correctly? Are we securing in the bucket of a front end loader, or are we using cherry pickers? Are we do we have what's doing it the right way and the safe way? Are they trained to be working in, on, and around rail equipment? Lots of ways to do that. You get your E-rail safe. Are they, your employees? Have they gone through the TWIC to even be on site if they're at a site that needs the TWIC card? Making sure that everybody is qualified and trained to operate safely in and around rail equipment is key. As you all know, this is a very dangerous industry, and folks, taking shortcuts can be very bad. So making sure folks are trained and able to work safely on your sites are important. And then, and something for you to consider is, will you have somebody on site to make sure that they're following all of your rules and guidelines? Is this somebody that is this an entity that you've worked with before and you have a level of trust with? Or is this, we don't want to get complacent, so we're just going to have our safety person on site or a quality person on site to make sure that you're not only protecting the safety of your employees that are there working, but also really theirs. And so all decisions, questions you have to ask and things to work through to consider, because ultimately, we can move this stuff in one piece damage-free all day, but if somebody gets hurt in the process, then that's, there's no sense in doing it. We have to do this without anybody getting hurt. All right, so we're loaded, we're secured. Up next is a measurement and an inspection. And so who is going to do this? Are you going to do it, or you have somebody else? Basically, you have to make sure that it measures the same size or smaller than what you have approved to move, and is it going to move safely on there? So who's going to come and do the inspection? Do you have a qualified inspection team, or do you have to contract somebody else to come do it on your behalf? A lot of the Class 1s will do it on their own, but again, a lot of them will then sometimes will contract it out depending on where they are and what they're doing. Same question. Do you have somebody on staff that can do it? Is your railroad, geographically, are you close enough to be able to cover the entire railroad, or are you spread out and need, various parties to cover it for you? So again, does the securement match what you see, or does it exceed the approved loading and securement? Is it better from a securement plan, or does it at the very least match what they provided? Certainly anybody can over-secure, and that's no problem, but the key is to make sure it's secured at least to the minimum requirements of the various guidelines that are out there. And then the measurements, do they match the approved drawings? If it doesn't, why? Maybe it's not centered on the rail car? Maybe they've misloaded it on the rail car somehow. Even off by 1/8 of an inch can significantly impact the clearance. Is it wider than expected, taller, longer, heavier? What's changed? And again, this happens more often than not, so you probably have experience with this exact thing. A lot of times stuff will grow when it's on the water coming, when it's being imported. I think salt water makes these things grow. So things show up and they're bigger. There's a pipe that's been rolling on. Somebody's added a handrail to a piece of it. It's just bigger somehow. And so what do we do at that point? And this goes back to one of my earlier questions. Is this something that's produced, or is it on site somewhere and can be inspected? And so if we get there, we get it loaded up and it no longer clears, how do we go about that? Can it be reloaded? Can it be recentered on a rail car? Can parts be removed? What can be done to move it? And is that an answer that can be answered within 24, 48 hours? Or is this an answer that we're not going to get 2 to 3 weeks or more? You might have to they might need to unload the component and store it somewhere until they can answer their questions, or maybe they leave it on the rail car and pay a fee to have that car sitting loaded in the way at your facility. But really, there's ways around that. So making sure that they can get it cleared and ready to roll. But in all honesty, that's really the exception rather than the norm. Normally these things get loaded up, secured and inspected, everything meets requirements, and you're able to get the train ready to go and get it departed. So to that point, we're secured and inspected, we're ready to roll. So we're moving in, regular train service. Like I said earlier, headed movements are key. We keep it in focus in view of the crew. What do you do to get to the yard? Even the slightly oversized components, you have to keep them monitored because you've got folks handling these rail cars. My experience is providing additional safety briefings and added focus to make sure that the rail crews, when they're switching a load of steel pipe or a steel plate rather that's over the sides of the car, it may not extend more than a few inches over the side, but it's low to the deck of the car, and you may be switching it at dusk or at night or in adverse weather conditions. Just remembering that you've got, in track 6, you've got this steel plate car, and it's a little bigger than normal, so just keep an eye on it. Just something as quick as that can really maybe be the difference between somebody getting clipped or somebody, recognizing the car is there and working safely around it. And then just don't let it dwell. Keep it moving. That only keeps your customer happy, but it just reduces your exposure. Anytime anything's in the yard, as you know, it gets handled a lot more often, a lot more touches. So just keeping a focus on them to keep them moving through the yard and moving to destination or interchange is key. So yeah, it's the communication. Communicate as much as possible. Over communicate, right? I mean, that's always been the key for that. Is over communication. You have bulletins or notices that you publish for your posting trains. Is it something that the dispatcher has, or are you just briefing one-on-one with your train crews and other management? Depending on the size of your operation, it's going to change how you communicate and what means of communication you have. But just communicating with others is really the key there. The communication points are what are the hard and soft valves? What are the things that are immovable that we have to be aware of versus things that are movable? Are we moving? Are we going to temporarily relocate a sign for this movement? What are your speed restrictions? If you're operating between terminals and you have a railroad that's good for 25 miles an hour or maybe 40 miles an hour, but you have a few points that are speed restricted, or maybe this component is speed restricted for the entire length of its journey, what are those speed restrictions? Where are your close clearances? If you're spotting industries and you've got a local and you're spotting industries and this car is on your train, understanding where your close clearances are for your industries is important. Are there riders with the train? Is there an employee in charge of those riders? And then really it just comes down to briefing, rebrief all the time. The communication, you cannot over communicate when you're actually operating these operating trains or operating a railroad when you've got these types of components in your network there. So that really brings me to the end of my presentation. I'm trying to get it to click one more page. That's what special train service. That's all the things I just noted there, and then that really brings me to the end of my presentation here. I'm happy to answer any questions that y'all might have. If there's something that I can't answer, I will certainly take it back, and we will follow up after the discussion to answer those one-to-one. And then, Michelle, I'll let you take control of the screen here. My email address will be provided here. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions anybody has. there's any specific questions, I can certainly direct that to somebody who can answer specific questions on anything that you might have. Happy to be as a resource to y'all to move things safely.
Great. Thank you so much, Clay, for that really comprehensive review of these high and wide movements. As we heard today, and some of us that have been in these movements before, we know that there's a lot of moving parts that go into the safe operation of these. And with that, I'm sure there are a lot of questions here, too. So with that, if anybody does have any questions, please write them into the questions bar on your task bar over there on the right-hand side now, and we'll pull them up and answer these as they come on in. So the first question we do have is for Clay, what is a shiftable deck?
Good question. Shiftable deck will be anything that is able to be moved with, on the rail car. So typically, when you've got a very large load, a super load of some sort, a turbine or generator, it'll be secured to the deck of the rail car, but then the rail car, using hydraulics, will be able to be moved up and down, left to right, typically 18 to 24 inches max. You're typically in the 10 to 14-inch range, but it just allows you to shift around hard fouls that you wouldn't necessarily be able to do otherwise.
Okay, thanks, Clay. We've got a couple more questions in here, and there's one here that also talks about terms a little bit, so I'll jump right to that one. What is a break bulk term, and what does row mean? You had it in one of your slides.
Very good question. Break bulk is anything that is not a mass quantity type of product. So if you look at agricultural, or you get steamships full of grain or soybeans or something like that, break bulk is anything that's going to come in and be broken down, and when it's offloaded from the ship to the dock. So wind blades, steam turbines, printing presses, automotive manufacturing tools. Really, anything that's not a bulk commodity would be break bulk. Row, short for roll on, roll off. So anything with wheels, steel, rubber, anything that can be driven or towed off of a steamship. So vehicles, bulldozer tractors, construction equipment, farm equipment. So row is anything that can be rolled on or rolled off.
Okay, great. Okay, so I have a couple more questions for you, Clay. How do you determine the right car for the right shipment?
Very good question. You have to take into account all the physical characteristics of the load, and then also the characteristics of your railroad. So you get your load and the road. There are dozens of different car types, hundreds of cars. I mean, and every car type has a different iteration that you've got. Is this something that can be loaded on a 70-ton capacity flat car, something that's very light, but you need two of them because it's very long? Is this something that's very dense, very heavy, where you're going to need an 8-axle rail car to distribute the axle loading weight out over your axles? If you've got a 268 K load limit for your railroad, that is a 286 load on a 4-axle car, then you have to go to more axles to distribute that weight appropriately. Is there a bridge that you need to have the axle loading spread out? Maybe you need a longer rail car, maybe you need a bolstered load. So you really have to take into the characteristics of what is being shipped, and also what you're shipping, your railroad capacity is. So whether you're looking at a shiftable deck car, you're looking at a Schnabel rail car, whether you're looking at a depressed center deck, an 8-axle, 12-axle, 16-axle rail car, every load's going to need a different review on it, and it really just comes down to what can your railroad handle and what does the load require.
All right, thank you, Clay. Are shorelines gaining interest in these movements? And the second part of that is, are shorelines becoming more involved in these processes?
Absolutely, on both. typically short lines provide, a very high level of service to the customers that the Class 1, typically just don't want to, or can't in some respects. So short lines and regionals and anybody, that is providing that very high level of customer service is going to get the focus from what customers want. A lot of times the destination where these things go is really dictated on where a project is. Is it a power plant? Is it an automotive factory that's building vehicles? Is it a factory that's building tractors or farm equipment to be exported? So a lot of this stuff is determined not really based off of the railroad that's there. It's just the geographical location of, hey, this is what's here, and we're going to do this, and this is what we have to do. But like I say, the type of service that short lines provide makes them very attractive. And is there more attention, less attention? It comes and goes. It varies. As various industries come and go, there's more attention for some versus others, but it's really, do you serve a port? Do you serve an inland port? Do you serve an industrial park? What is it that you're serving? If you are in an area that is mainly serves grain shuttle facilities, and you've got a couple of warehouses that do box cars, you may not have a lot of experience because there's not a lot of need for this type of freight to come through. But if you're serving a port facility, you're going to see a lot of this on a regular basis, or you could very well see a lot of these types come up.
Great. Last question I have for you. You and I could probably both answer this one. It has a little bit to do with waybills. If there are issues with transferring the movement, who do you talk to first, the Class 1 or the company involved with the shipment? Want to take a stab at that, Clay?
Yeah, I think that there's no broad brush answer for that. Depends on the Class 1 that you're dealing with and what the movement is. This is something that's just barely a high wide on your railroad. It may not even be considered high wide on the connecting Class 1. That would probably, if there's an issue with the waybill and getting it passed through, that what is that issue? The person submitting the waybill, it would probably be best to have the company or the person submitting the waybill have a conference call with yourself and the connecting road to hammer it out. If this is a super load or a one-off significant type of situation, there'll be enough pre-discussion leading up to the shipment of that commodity or that piece that if there is a problem with the waybill, it should be just a quick phone call from you over to that Class 1 or connecting road to say, hey, there's an issue with the waybill. We all know it's coming. Can we force it through a system or something? Because we're typically outside of the box on this stuff. That sometimes just the standard processes just don't apply. Like I said, no broad-based answer on that. Michelle, you might have an answer on that too, given your background and experience, but that would be my answer.
Thanks. No, I would parallel that myself, and like you said in one of your last slides there, it's all about communication. So, like you said, if it's not considered a high and wide on something else, that might be just an additional question that short lines regionals might want to ask themselves to ensure that their property probably looks a little different than what their Class 1 partners do. So, just another additional question to consider when thinking about moving high and wides for sure. But communication is key, and touching base a week, a day, a few hours before the movement, that the more prepared you are for these kind of movements, the easier and smoother it's going to go. So always having that key point of contact of both, if you are getting it from another Class 1 or even a different short line, it's very good to align those practices far in advance and practice that. Practice makes perfect, right?
Absolutely.
So, I would mirror that. The last thing we have here, and we mentioned this before, but I'll take this one. It's is this recording available? We'd like to share it with our group. Hey, that's great. And I know Mr. Campbell's given us our blessing here with BNS Logistics to have this posted as well as recorded. So if anybody does want to review this and take it back, take some good suggestions and tips, recommendations back to your company, feel free to re-watch this. This will be on our website about a day after this ends today, and you'll be able to watch that and get a PDF version of this PowerPoint as well. And the last screen that we have up here, again, is the contact information. So if you think of any questions after this presentation, feel free to reach out to Clay or myself. If you have any webinar questions or suggestions, please feel free to call or contact me. And Clay's information is available there if you have anything specific to the high and wide presentation which we have just completed. So, well, that covers all of our questions for today. And contact us if you have any questions. If you would like to provide any further feedback for future webinar presentations, please feel free to reach out to me or Sabrina Weiss. Our contact information is there on the screen. So that will end our today's presentation, and stay tuned with us for more information about our next webinar, which will be in September, about chlorine. And I want to end today with saying thank you very much for everybody for joining us, presenters and participants alike, and make it a safe day. We'll see you another time. Thanks, guys.